Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Echoes of Shattered Destiny. Episode 14. Chapter 101 to 107. 2 days before announcement. You're sure they're going to accept me? I asked for the 30th time since passing the welcome to the town of Pine Plains. I had yet to see a single building, house, or speck of life since passing that sign. There seemed to be nothing but unending forest, caps of juniper and pine that inched higher and higher as they veered up the slopes of the mountainous terrain. The scent of sap and earth permeated the air, mixing with the richness of the trees, slipping through the sliver in the window as we coasted down the highway. The views were incredible. Jagged walls of earth surrounded us as we drove through and around mountains. We had been driving for hours now, but the finality of everything hadn't truly set in until I saw the sign, reminding me that we were growing closer and closer to the capital of Maddox's of our pack. I have no doubt they'll accept you. Maddox replied from the driver's seat, the depth of his voice near matching the rumble of the engine as we sped up an incline. Even though the sounds were similar, only one affected me so much. Eyes I had once thought were honey-colored, but were actually full of golden fragments, were locked on me in the passenger seat. The way his eyes would heat when he looked at me for too long, darkening the golden hues into something savage, the impact of it hit me full force every time. I swallowed heavily when they drifted downwards, to the charcoal-colored dress I had picked out for this special occasion. It was the most professional article of clothing I had in my closet, along with a pair of black pumps. The dress fit to my athletic form, which had toned even more over the last 3 months, and ended just above my knees. His eyes ventured back up, taking their time as I squirmed in my seat. They will accept you because you are my mate, and you deserve to be accepted. He smirked, revealing just a flash of canine before wiping the expression away. As for our people, they will accept you because I do. They will respect you as I do, and trust will build over time. Wow! They must have a lot of faith in you and your parents. I murmured in surprise. The next words that trickled through my brain might have been better left unsaid, but I had a bad habit of letting things slip past my lips. Not many had that kind of loyalty towards Tyler or his parents. Most of them only stayed because there was no other option. Not everyone is capable of inspiring that kind of loyalty. Maddox said with honesty in his voice, not at all irritated from the mention of my recently deceased ex-boyfriend. The man-boy I thought I'd mark, mate, and spend the rest of my life with. The excitement I once felt at being toted around on his arm made me want to gag. Maddox's eyes flickered over to me again, though this time only for a fraction of a second. You'll notice that my family house isn't very large. Most of the money that is taxed from the members of our pack is put back into the community, and the warriors who protect it. Actually, a good portion of my parents' income is from my morn. Doesn't your dad make money from being alpha? I questioned, remembering how Tyler and I would run through the maze-like halls of his house, which seemed more like a mansion or estate. There had been a time or two when I was very young, where I had actually become lost within those halls. The first few times Tyler had found me crying in the hallway, and would snicker at me as he led me downstairs. There was never a time where Tyler had to go without something, never a time where his family worried about making ends meet. Being an alpha doesn't come with a paycheck. Maddox chuckled lowly, the sound rumbling through his chest. Even though I felt like I knew the man well, some of the things he said surprised me. I soaked in every word, feeling out of step in the world of ruling. A good alpha takes what he needs to survive comfortably, only if his people are living in the same conditions. I replayed his words in my head for the rest of the drive, trying to apply them to my own newfound position as Queen of the Vampires. As we coasted down the curved highway that wrapped around the base of the mountain, I thought of my new role and how much trouble I had encountered in just 3 short months. Since the death of their once king, things have been rocky. I was a newcomer, a tribrid without any roots. The ones who followed me did so out of duty and sense of self-preservation, but there were still many who voiced their opinions against me. I couldn't blame them, not entirely. After all, my first act in their world had been to assassinate their king. The dark thoughts that swarmed my head scattered as my name fell from Maddox's lips, fleeing from the sun that washed my world in tones of gold and amber. "We're just a few minutes away," he told me with a grin, chuckling when my eyes flitted out the window. "Is the capital of your pack in the middle of the forest?" I asked, lifting an eyebrow at him. While I had expected a sprawling city, or at least a semi-bustling town, neither Maya or I would have complained if it was. It would give us an excuse to go on more than our morning runs, which had become few and far between already. "Now you're picturing huts, and little wooden cabins," Maddox deadpanned, making me snicker where I sat. "That and small fishing boats, nightly town bonfires," my teasing trailed off when we coasted down another hill, and around a sharp curve. Traffic seemed too thin at some point, making us and the 2 cars behind us the only ones on the road. In a moss-colored minivan behind us, with rusted rims and a bundle of lavender hanging from the rear-view mirror, was my grandma, dad, and Sean. Brianna, her parents, and Mason followed behind, in a blacked-out SUV that held both Giovanni and Tristan inside. We had decided to bring Holly along as well, to expose her more to the world. It was Holly I worried about the most. She seemed to shut down once being rescued, fearful of this new place. She rode in the blacked-out SUV with Tristan and Giovanni, even though she could withstand direct daylight. Her half-witch, half-vampire genetics made sunlight uncomfortable, but not deadly. As lost in thought as I wasn't oblivious to the passing forests and ravines. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of silver, and turned my head to see the very distinct outline of a wolf dashing through the woods. Anytime it neared closer to the tree line, I could see a flash of silver and a long snout. "I think we're being followed," I told Maddox, nodding towards the passenger window. He glanced over once, then twice before rolling his eyes and cursing. What I did notice was the very distinct lack of surprise on his face. "Of course, Mom told him we were almost here," he snorted, turning his eyes back to the road. I watched the muscle in his jaw move before looking back towards the silver wolf. "The welcoming committee tailing us right now is my younger brother, Brandon. Well, I don't know how skilled he is at swimming, but he's running out of ground to run on," I snickered, now fully invested in watching. The forest began to thin out, giving me a better view of my mate's younger brother. We had talked about his family many times, but Brandon was always a subject that made Maddox uptight. Brandon's wolf was silver with some onyx patches around his face and ears. Nearly the same size as my wolf, he kept up with us easily, even over the rocky terrain. He was agile, I'd give him that. He pressed off of a particularly large stone and landed on 4 paws just a few seconds later, never losing speed. His eyes, which were a more washed-out shade of Maddox's honey color, kept darting towards us. "He's showing off for you," Maddox deadpanned, never once looking over from where he sat. "If you wave at him, he might never leave us be." For good measure, I waved a couple times. Another minute in and I watched with held breath as the road we were currently on became a 2-lane bridge. There was no more earth on either side of us for Brandon to continue running on, just a steep rocky slope, and a near-endless looking lake that glittered beneath the sun. "He's not going to jump," I shook my head, certain of it. A few more seconds passed, but he wasn't slowing down. If anything, he was gaining speed with every leap and push. I looked towards Maddox with wide eyes. Is he? Maddox glanced over at the cliff and was quiet for just a second. The fall won't kill him. Won't even break a bone if he sticks his landing right. That's going to be hard to do as a wolf, I pointed out, just a tad more concerned than Maddox. He's a fast shifter. Maddox shrugged, lifting a thick eyebrow at me. At the very last moment, Brandon's feet kicked off the ground and into the air. 1 foot turned into 6 and then 7, until there was nothing but sky and air beneath his body. With his snout towards the glittering lake, the silver fur shrunk into his body, revealing skin, a cocky grin, and a very obvious male appendage. The splash signifying his landing was the last thing I heard. We coasted over the bridge and back into the densely packed forest without another glimpse of silver fur or toffee eyes. Now it was my turn to gasp when the forest finally opened up. The trees veered off to the left and right, creating a bowl shape around the entire city with steep mountain edges blocking everything in. There were at least 3 snow-capped mountains off in the distance, each one more jagged and unique. The entire city was bathed in color. Brick buildings and cobalt shutters, plum-colored park benches and flower-wrapped street lamps. There were buildings with graffiti art on the sides, pictures that sprawled from top to bottom showing hyper-realistic wolves and other animals. This is the art district. Anything that has to do with creative expression, you'll find here. Maddox smirked softly, some of the harshness in his eyes smoothing out. Art galleries, classes, restaurants, and clubs are all on this side of town. The university is actually only a few blocks away. We continued through the art district, and I marveled at the random statues that seemed to have little monuments around town. Many of them were abstract pieces, twisted and curved. I couldn't interpret a single one, but they were all incredible to look at. The college students make those. Maddox pointed out as we passed another. Mom figured they'd look better around town than in a storage closet somewhere, so every year she picks a few winners to be featured in the city. From the art district, it was another 10-minute drive to a modest-looking neighborhood, surrounded by little ponds and domed fountains. The houses were clearly meant for families, judging from the assortment of toys across many of the lawns. The neighborhood was very obviously lived in and loved with great care. We headed towards the end of the street, and pulled into a long driveway. My heart thudded with every passing second, listening to the sound of smooth pavement beneath the tires of the SUV. I took a second to admire the house, trying to see a younger version of Maddox storming out the front door and down the porch steps. Large windows allowed light into the living room, giving me a glimpse at a leather sectional and a small television. We hadn't the chance to climb the porch steps before the front door was opening, and a petite woman came outside. Chestnut hair that drifted just a bit farther than her shoulders, along with a light spattering of freckles across her face. Maddox's Morn still looked young, with slight creases around her eyes and mouth. A smile stole her face the moment she saw us both, though I'm sure my face was one of surprise. "You're both early," she squealed, eyes lighting up as she clasped her hands together. She pivoted on her heel and glanced back at us. "I'll go get your dad." I smirked at Maddox as I heard his Morn's voice ring throughout the house, telling Killian to get downstairs and that work can take a minute. I wasn't at all stunned to see that Maddox was the spitting image of his dad, who gave me a firm handshake and what I assumed was a warm smile. He was much like Maddox with the limited facial expressions, the most frequent ones ranged from mildly disgruntled to full-blown rage. The only difference were that Maddox's eyes were completely unique from his parents, and that his dad's hair was a bit on the longer side. I have been waiting so long to meet you. All I ask is that you call me Claire, and make yourself at home here. Maddox's mourn beamed, pulling me into a hug even though I had no say. She was a few inches taller than me, and for a brief moment, my chest tightened as I remembered my own mourn. Our relationship had been tumultuous at best, but there had been a time where I wanted her attention and advice. She gave Maddox a smug grin and released me from her grip. I told him that once he left this town he'd finally find his mate. I knew from the very beginning it would take someone special to catch his attention. He was just too stubborn to listen to me. Special is a very generous way of describing me. I nodded, giving her a sheepish grin that showed just how out of my element I was. Fighting I could do, but meeting my mate's parents that was bound to make anyone nervous. I stumbled over my words for a moment before regaining my footing. Are you sure you don't mind my family staying here? Of course, we don't mind. You're all a part of the family now. It's been too long since we've had a full house. Claire shook her head, smiling softly up at Maddox's dad, Killian. I've been beginning to think Killian here enjoys the peace. Of course, I don't mind if they stay. Killian grumbled, the look on his face was equal parts pain and adoration. I didn't bother trying to stifle my grin, even when Maddox cocked a dark eyebrow at me. Dad, Grandma, and Sean arrived just 15 minutes later, pulling the van into the long driveway. Grandma veered towards the porch, stopping at the garden that sat just next to the front steps. Colorful flowers sat in rows, with a small wire fence protecting them from smaller creatures. The flowers themselves were wilted, only shadows of their potential. I watched Dad chuckle to himself as he spotted her, and hobbled over to the trunk to grab some of the smaller bags. Maddox and Sean grabbed the rest, hauling them into the house. I've had nothing but trouble with those plants. Claire sighed, giving my grandma a tired grin. I've tried just about everything, but they keep DG on me. Don't you worry, I'll have these plants healthy in no time. Grandma waved a hand at Claire, whose grin widened even further. Actually, there's another garden out back. It's doing a lot worse than this one. Killian's sister planted them for me, but they really do seem to hate me. Claire chuckled, leading Grandma inside and to the backyard. Your brother left a few hours ago, presumably to welcome you two in. Killian grunted, reminding me far too much of Maddox with his calm and poised demeanor. You should be safe to go for dinner without running into him. Is Brandon really that bad? I snorted, glancing between both father and son. Two identical faces of suppressed brutality. Hidden behind smooth skin, dark lashes, and loads of silky hair. Attractive in that savage sort of way. Maddox let a small smirk form on his face at my question, while Killian actually rolled his eyes. My other son can be exhausting, was all he said before returning to Claire's side. We stayed for another hour, and I relished the chaos of it all. Grandma was talking Claire's ear off about her garden, calling me over every few minutes to join in the conversation. My dad had liked Killian from the beginning, actually having some friends that grew up in his pack. Dad was recounting his war stories, while Killian added a few of his own. We all but had to pry them away to make the reservation Maddox had placed for all of us. I think I'm actually going to stay here, dear. Grandma smiled softly, but I could see the eagerness in her eyes at a new project. That garden would have no choice but to grow, no matter how much it detested Claire. I am going to get an early start on that garden. Mark my words, it'll flourish before we leave. Make sure you eat. Mom. Dad frowned, bushy eyebrows creasing together. Don't try me. She frowned at him, gesturing towards the door. I made sure you were fed for 25 years, leave me be. I know how to feed myself. Sean and I snickered as Dad mumbled something incoherent, following us from the house. Maddox had made plans at a restaurant in town, undoubtedly a popular one given it was Friday afternoon. I had been correct when we had to circle the block 3 times before finding a slim parking space alongside the road. Upbeat music played from across the street, carrying the mouth-watering scents of fried food. There was a patio outside that overlooked a small lake, and was already freckled with people milling about. I was relieved to see I wasn't the only one overdressed. Plenty of she-wolves wore dresses and shorts, enjoying the warmth that came with the fading sun. As we exited the vehicle and crossed the street to the restaurant, I couldn't help but feel eyes on us. Everywhere I looked, people began to notice Maddox and I. A warmth spread down my chest and into my stomach when his arm wound itself around my waist, holding me close under the eyes of half the town. I feel incredibly vain for even saying this, but everyone is staring at us, I mumbled quiet enough for only him to hear. I'm not exactly the most sociable alpha, if you haven't noticed, he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching. Are you making a joke? I snorted, narrowing my eyes as I peered up at him. Not at all, his eyebrow lifted, a smirk stealing his face as he opened the door for me and my family. A young host with neatly styled golden hair, and a dark-collared t-shirt led us to our table, flushing profusely whenever Maddox looked in his direction. His cinnamon freckles were completely lost as he stammered a warm welcome to the two of us. Looks like it's not just the she-wolves drooling over their alpha. Sean chuckled once we were seated out on the patio, directly beside the picket fence that separated the restaurant from the sidewalk and street. While it gave us the perfect view of the setting sun and glittering lake ahead, it also gave everyone on the street their own perfect view of Maddox and I. I had dealt with plenty of hate in the past, so I found myself waiting for the petty whispers to start. They wouldn't dare. Maddox said without a fraction of hesitation, reassuring me that this pack was much different from the one I had been raised in. Not around you, they wouldn't. I smirked, meeting the curious eyes that watched us. I wonder what they'll say when you're not at my side. Maddox snorted, a quiet sound that I had almost missed. In the depths of his golden eyes, there was more than a hint of amusement. You're excited for them to challenge you, he stated, as it wasn't a question. A giggle escaped my lips, followed by my dad's raspy chortle. Of course, she is. Didn't hesitate to annoy you off, even before you met. He grinned, and the sight made my chest flutter. This was the happiest Dad had been since Morn was KD. Grandma was forcing him to leave the house, and even with his injured leg, walking was getting just a tad easier. He was making friends, rebuilding his life that had once crumbled. What had been most surprising was the excitement he showed when Maddox and I announced we'd be leaving for the capital of our pack. We had offered they come, of course, without much hope that Dad would leave the house. All week he talked about the trip, and how his bag was already packed. I blinked back the emotion in my eyes, refusing to become a blubbering mess over top of the steak I ordered. Instead, I lived in the moment, the curious eyes along my skin already forgotten. I was already planning on my midnight trip for leftovers as we left the restaurant, and quite literally stumbled into two people who seemed more than elated to see Maddox. I knew who the first one was instantly. The moment his cerulean-colored eyes met mine, the same shade as Claire's, and his smirk, the one he shared with Maddox. At Brandon's side, her arm laced with his, was a woman with pale blonde hair. Her rich, hazel eyes brightened and an excited smile blossomed on her face, turning her cheeks a rosy shade of pink. Well, if it isn't my brother's mate. Brandon grinned cheekily, untangling himself from his companion to take a few steps towards me. He was just a few inches shorter than Maddox, but still towered over me. His dark hair was cropped a bit longer, making him look mischievous and rugged. I felt my own eyes widen and surprise flicker across my face when his eyes dipped down to the dress I wore. "Brother, you didn't tell me." "Maddox," the blonde squealed, the sound both soft and feminine. She clasped her dainty hands together, painted nails drawing my attention. "Oh, you should have called me once you got in. We could have planned something." Her eyes swiveled to me as I took a step in Maddox's direction, flecks of mossy green showing around her pupil. Her smile never faltered, but I swore I saw a flash of something cross her eyes that brief second. "This is your mate." Her petal-colored lips widened, flashing a genuine smile that was soft and sweet. She pressed forwards and took her hands in my own. "It's so incredible to meet you, Luna. I'm Maddox and Brandon's best friend, Cassidy. We practically grew up with one another, well, us and their cousins." It was hard to keep up with her enthusiasm, but the kindness she spoke with seemed so genuine. I gave her my own smile and introduced myself. Her attention quickly turned back to Maddox, and I tried not to let that fact grate on my nerves. Shoving my wolf's instincts down where they could no longer torment me, I paid attention to the conversation, and was surprised at what I had noticed. Maddox was very obviously glaring at Brandon, all whilst Cassidy talked solely to him. "I think we should definitely get together tomorrow for lunch," she said with a giggle, brushing her hand against his arm to gain his attention. His eyes flickered down on me when I very obviously stiffened, but Cassidy was still talking. "We have so much to catch up on. Hopefully you won't be leaving again soon with my birthday coining up next week. We will be in town for a while." Maddox nodded at Cassidy, familiarity in his eyes for his childhood best friend. "I ensure Lola and I can find time to meet up with you, though not until after the pack meeting tomorrow. Why don't you invite them to the party Sunday, Cass?" Brandon murmured, a silky smile on his face. Like a warped version of Maddox that I neither liked nor hated, Brandon was the exact opposite of his brother. Brandon tugged on a lock of her pale blonde hair, making her giggle and swat at his hand. His amused eyes flickered over to me. "I don't suppose you like to have fun, Lola?" Maddox here was always so miserable at parties. I'd hate it if his mate had the same affliction. "Really, it would be super awesome if you came." Cassidy smiled softly at Maddox. Her eyes flickered over to me after a few long seconds, but her smile never faltered. "It's at a local swimming spot in town. We keep it secret year-round so the tourists can't ruin it." Maddox's eyes were hardened granite, glancing down at me in a way that made my face and neck flush. "Don't you dare!" he warned, gruff voice rolling through my head on a wave of command that made my knees nearly buckle. Unfortunately, I didn't do very well with commands. "It sounds like fun." I pouted. "Besides, I need to get to know people in our pack and they need a chance to get to know their Luna. There will be other opper will be there." I grinned, feeling his rough growl roll across my mind. Chapter 102. There was something so satisfying about disobeying my mate, no matter how selfish and conceited it sounded. Perhaps it was the way his eyes darkened and nostrils flared whenever rage surged through him, or maybe it was the fact that deep down, my disobedience turned him on. The respected and feared Alpha Maddox, tormented and denied by a girl. From the possessive touches that reminded me who my body responded to, and with the looks that held just a flicker of anger, I knew what Maddox had planned for me the moment we made it back to the house. Luckily, the things he wanted to do weren't suited for his parents' house, so I was in the clear for the time being. A silent game played between the two of us, one where I seldom won but I wasn't through trying. Later that night, like many previous nights, sleep was an elusive beast that even I couldn't tame. I woke up with foggy eyes and a bit of drool on my face, torn from what could have been the best sleep I've had all week. That was perhaps the only thing I missed about my old life, the endless potential for naps. I woke from Giovanni tugging on the cord that connected me, the vampire queen, to every single living vampire in this world. It wasn't quite like a mind link. I couldn't enter his thoughts and snare him to my will. I could merely feel his presence, like an annoying tap on the shoulder that wouldn't cease. I left the bedroom and wandered down the hall to the bathroom, opting to wake Maddox up once I could form coherent sentences. I'm beginning to wonder who's really the monarch here. Doesn't the queen ever get to sleep in? I mumbled to myself, stumbling backwards when I nearly ran into Brandon's towering form. I took a few steps back, wiping my eyes with the backs of my hands. Oh! What were you saying about monarchs and lack of sleep? He smirked down at me, the spitting image of Maddox, only with messy hair and crystal blue eyes. The lights in the hallway were bright, making my eyes ache, but I could still smell the alcohol that wafted off of Brandon in waves. Rich amber and notes of thick honey, definitely some kind of whiskey. He wasn't drunk, not by far, but he had consumed more than enough to affect your average male wolf. Just mumbling about a dream I had. I said a bit harsher than I meant, but he was blocking the bathroom door with his frame. Both Claire and Killian had agreed it was better not to tell Brandon the truth. At least, not until the big announcement. Apparently, the man couldn't keep a secret to save his life. It was almost impossible to believe. Maybe you could tell me about this dream sometime, if my brother dares to let you out of his sight. Brandon replied, his smirk a bit messy considering his state. I couldn't keep glare from settling over my face when Brandon felt bold enough to glance down at the tank top and shorts I wore. Not at all revealing, but my obvious anger only seemed to amuse him further. I stepped back and to the side when he tried to take a step towards me. Why don't you hold your breath, and I'll get on that? I answered without pause, my voice rightfully harsh. I slipped past him and gave him one last glare. Go sleep off the alcohol before I knock you out myself. Now I see why you're my brother's mate. He chuckled to himself, turning on his heel. With a last drunken grin, he called out over his shoulder. Good night, Lola. I woke Maddox up 10 minutes later, letting him know his brother was a raging dumbass. After spending a total of 3 minutes convincing Maddox not to go and kick him, we left the house and hopped into the sedan. Tristan, Holly, Giovanni, Brianna, and Mason all stayed in a house 2 neighborhoods over. The houses were newly built, so many of them were vacant for the time being. It was the perfect place to stash 2 vampires, and one witch vampire who happened to be my half-sister. We pulled up to the 2-story house, wide with large windows that overlooked the porch and front yard. A driveway jutted off to the side, wrapping around the back where a 2-car garage sat. As Maddox and I walked up the porch steps and through the front door, I was hit with the distinct scent of my grandina's lavender cookies mixed with the heady perfume that was human blood. Since becoming the vampire queen, human blood was as vital as food and water. Granted, I could go longer without human blood than I could food, but it was blood that often smelled better. A month ago, I had tried to go an entire week without the thick taste of blood in my mouth. The sickness that swept through me was horrible, all but vanishing once I finally gave in. I could feel my mouth watering, though I wasn't sure if it was from the blood or the cookies. As we walked through the foyer and into the kitchen, I was greeted by the scent of both. Tristan leaned against the wall, his golden hair cropped shorter now, just a few inches below his ears. It made him look a bit younger, less serious even though a scowl currently decorated his face. Per usual, Holly was nowhere to be found. Over the past month, I had been trying to get to know her. never once pushing her to join the outside world or my pack. I tried everything possible to reach her. Oddly enough, it seemed Tristan was the one to understand her most of the time. He was the only one who could get her to open up, but it didn't seem to be helping. She continued to shut herself off from the world, refusing to talk about the magic that had to be swirling beneath her skin. The same way I swore it swirled beneath mine. Giovanni sat at the kitchen table, watching Brianna with dark eyes that shimmered with amusement every so often. Giovanni had always been reserved. Only Tristan and Brianna could evoke the slightest hint of emotion from the man. While Brianna invoked all of the good things, Tristan had the opposite effect. "Does this taste right to you?" Brianna frowned, shoving a cookie in my face. The delicate scent of lavender mixed with vanilla and brown sugar to create something deliciously unique. I grabbed the cookie, and took a bite, wrinkling my nose when something salty crossed my tongue. "Too much salt," she sighed softly, snatching the oven mitts from off the counter. With her hands on her hips, she glared at the remaining cookies in the oven. "You know, when your grandma gave me this recipe, I thought there would be actual measurements." "Grandma never measures anything," I chuckled, my eyes straying to where Giovanni sat, a dark glass of blood in his hands. With a snort, he stood and waltzed over to the fridge, purposefully ignoring Tristan as he stood just a foot away. He grabbed a blood bag from the fridge and poured it into a glass, approaching me with long steps to place it in my hands. "Thanks," I mumbled, still not at all used to my new title. Vampires and their monarchs were different than werewolves. While there was no vampire command forcing their will, they could feel the strength of their ruler and had a sort of sixth sense when it came to certain things. It didn't go as far as a mind link, but both Giovanni and Tristan could often tell when I was hungry for something other than food. Giovanni was a man of few words, but the fact that he often brought me blood when I needed it, that was statement enough for where we stood. He supported me, both because of my friendship with Brianna, and because of the new future I wished to put into motion. I tried not to drain the glass entirely within seconds, feeling Maddox's curious eyes on my face. "I'm sure you didn't call us here at 4 in the morning to chat?" I asked warily, already sure something had gone wrong. "Just another pesky band of vampires trying to rouse up trouble," Tristan sighed, brushing back the strands of hair from his face. When Giovanni grunted, Tristan flashed him an icy glare. "Pesky," Giovanni repeated, his light accent paired with his deep voice to create something almost musical. "They KD6 werewolves 6, I paled, already thinking about the future backlash and the grief the families must be going through. I glanced up at Maddox, whose golden eyes had darkened with rage. "Where are they attacking from? We'll send forces after the announcement, and give them an opportunity to stand down. They could cause much more damage within the next 8 hours, Brianna pointed out. "I know, but I don't think sending warriors there to slaughter them is any better," I sighed, plopping down in one of the wooden chairs at the dining room table. "I need the other vampires to see that I'm on their side, that I'm not going to kill them all because I'm mated to an alpha. Why don't you send your troops to where they've been attacking and simply tell them to hold back? Don't engage unless more lives are in danger," Tristan suggested, leveling his cool gaze with Maddox's. I could feel the response in him instantly, but Maddox had much more patience than Giovanni. Where Tristan and Giovanni often resorted to punches, Maddox hadn't so much as laid a finger on Tristan. "It's not a terrible plan," I replied, knowing as well as he did that it was our best option. Within the next half an hour, assignments had been sent out to a team of warriors, all of which Maddox and I trusted to obey orders. With bleary eyes, we headed for the front door. Tristan followed us outside, eyeing the rising sun warily. "We need to speak." His voice was unusually gruff, and I nodded for Maddox to get in the sedan without me. "Something wrong, Tristan?" "Your sister is having nightmares again," was all he said, and I felt my stomach plummet to the ground. "Bad ones. Have Brianna's parents had any luck yet?" I asked, feeling desperation swirl in the pits of my stomach. "They've found a few candidates," he nodded sharply, eyes staring down at me. "You'll get the files in a few hours. The sooner you go through them, the sooner we can get her help." "I'll get on it," I assured him, "but Maddox is going to have a say in it as well." "I'd expect nothing less," he replied with a brittle smile, eyes roaming my face before he turned on his heel and went back inside. Maddox and I putted down the road, the engine a smooth hum as we passed houses and street signs. When we passed his family home, I frowned and looked at him. "Where are we going?" I asked, to which he smirked softly. "You look like you could use a run." "I think I might want one as well. That sounds a lot more fun than sleeping," I replied truthfully, feeling my wolf stir beneath my skin. If there was one thing I adored more than sleep, but less than Maddox, it was shifting. The feel of bounding through the forest, your feet near silent against the earth as pure strength and instincts hurl you forwards, there's nothing more freeing. He pulled over on the shoulder of the road when the forest became thick, nearly impossible to peer through even from where we stood. It was impossible not to feel confident around Maddox, especially when I stripped the clothes from my body. His eyes tracked my every movement, leaving behind goosebumps along every place his mouth and hands had touched. Once we were both, the cool wind whipping across our heated skin, I closed my eyes and let Maya come through. The pain of shifting was brief, thanks to the nightly runs I often took. I charged into the forest after Maddox, hot on his trail as we kicked up dirt and clumps of grass. We were both blips of darkness as we sprinted throughout the forest. I tailed him for a few minutes, when Maya had the brilliant idea to nip at his hind legs. Like I had expected, he turned on his heel and the two of us skidded to a stop. It took a few seconds for the dirt to settle, my heart hammering as each one passed. With our chests heaving, we faced one another. There was a challenge in his eyes, and Maya snarled playfully when his voice ran through our head. "Did you just bite me, Lola?" Maddox's voice wasn't velvet smooth as it normally was, but rough and commanding. "Maybe if you picked up your pace, I wouldn't have to," I replied breathlessly, relishing the thrill as his eyes darkened and hackles raised. Maya and I, on the same page as always when it came to teasing our temperamental mate, had another plan in mind. I blinked innocently at him, taking a few steps forward to drop my head. Just as he lunged for me, easily suspecting I was up to no good, I rolled to the side and took off into the forest. I could feel him on my tail instantly, just a few feet away as he snapped and snarled at my heels. I feigned exhaustion for a few seconds before putting on a show and kicking off the ground in a burst of strength that sent me propelling forwards. There was a reason Maddox and I were mated, one of those reasons being that he was the only man in this world that held the title as my equal. While I leaped over the rotten carcass of a fallen tree, Maddox used it as a springboard, kicking off it as he soared into the air. The impact of his body slamming into mine made my teeth rattle, but I hardly felt the sliver of pain over the thrill of being chased and caught. The two of us landed in a mess of tangled limbs, and human as we rolled to a stop in the tall grass that surrounded us. I had landed rather clumsily on his chest, straddling his stomach. The pads of my fingers were pressed into the thick muscle that spanned his smooth chest. My eyes trailed the vein that ran down his neck before I smirked and dug my fingernails into his chest, pinning him down for the moment. My obsidian hair, still long and wavy, hung over us like a curtain. "See? Now's the perfect time to practice your self-control." I snickered breathlessly, my entire body thrumming from the closeness between us and the need that tugged at my own willpower. Maddox thrived and desired control, but secretly liked the disobedience and chaos I brought to his life. There was little to no one who would dare defy Maddox, a fact I had given little thought when I first met the man. I had been trying for weeks now to take the reins, each time failing, though not miserably. The outcome was still phenomenal each time. I could feel him stirring beneath me, hardening with every heavy breath that left his lips. Seconds later, the thick length of him brushed against my backside. Keeping one hand of fingernails firmly pressed into his skin, I used the other hand to reach behind me. Smooth skin stretched taut, just a few seconds of contact before Maddox snarled and flipped me over. My breath halted in my chest as the warm grass met my back. His large hand was wrapped around my throat, while his hulking form towered over me, wedged in between my spread legs. Since coming into both of my titles, Maddox and I rarely had more than a few minutes to ourselves. Unfortunately, this time was no different. As his beta's voice filled his mind, I felt a persistent and incredibly impatient tug from Tristan. "You tell me to control myself, but look at how wet you are." His snarl was another jolt of adrenaline, lighting up every nerve ending on my body, pulling my thoughts away from anyone other than himself. His fingers flexed around my throat, powerful and rough with calluses. The same ones that had ended many lives, just as his teeth had torn through countless enemies. The same set of teeth that currently hovered above my own throat. Yet, it wasn't fear that rushed through me. "The next time you do something like that, I will not stop. Regardless of who calls us." Chapter 103. I had promised myself I'd go through those files as soon as we made it back to the house, but the moment I curled up into the warmth of Maddox's teenage bed, my looming exhaustion swallowed me whole. "What happened to those important files?" he asked, his voice gravely. "This is the 7th 3 a.m. call in a month." I grumbled when Maddox began to move me, his muscular arms forming a cage around my torso. His eyes dripped honey and were hooded as he watched me. "As Luna and Vampire Queen, I declare that just this once, we're going back to sleep." His reply fell on deaf ears, because my eyes had already closed, and my mind plunged into darkness. The last few weeks, my sleeping moments were plagued with strange dreams. Much different than Holly's nightmares, which tore her from sleep with screams of mania, these dreams were bursts of color and sound. Jumbled images that burned into one another, leaving me breathless and confused as I woke up each morning. I wasn't sure what it meant, but deep in the recesses of my mind, buried in the hollows of my heart and the grooves of my ribcage, it felt like something was waking up. When I awoke that morning, finding Maddox still peacefully asleep, I made my way downstairs. The stairs were silent beneath my feet, unlike the constant creak in my childhood home. "Someone's making breakfast?" Maya inquired, her ears perking as our mouths salivated. I could hear the snap and crackle of bacon hitting the frying pan as I padded down the stairs. "Ugh, what if it's Brandon?" I grunted, coming to a halt. "We can use the pan to knock him out, then take his food." Maya shrugged, not at all deterred by our mate's younger brother. "Really, it's a win-win in my eyes. And you know I'm rarely ever wrong." As I rounded the corner with my eyes narrowed and shoulders tense, I was surprised to see Zeke leaning against the counter. All anger-filled thoughts about assault by frying pan left my head, and my posture relaxed just a tad. Zeke's chestnut hair was a mess on his head, proof that he had just woken up. He was staying just a few houses down from us, which meant Maddox's kitchen was the last place he should have been. What I noticed first was the powder blue apron wrapped around his neck. The waist ties hung useless at his side, much too short for his muscular form. On the front pocket, embroidered in gold cursive letters, was the name Claire. A platter of steaming eggs sat on the island counter, flecked with salt and pepper as they teased my rumbling stomach. Next to it was an even larger platter, stacked with various pancakes. I noticed a few that seemed to have chocolate chips or blueberries inside, while another smelled strongly of banana. "Morning!" Zeke called out over his shoulder, cursing when the bacon grease crackled and popped. His lopsided grin made me snort. "Breakfast will be ready in 10. He had pulled just about everything out. Various breads and jams lined the counters, but my rumbling stomach pointed out an obvious lack of cereal. I opened a few cabinets, frowning when I noticed a row of colorful boxes on the top shelf. The counter jabbed into my ribcage, but my fingers were still far below the assortment of cereal. "Zeke, can you grab me a couple boxes of cereal?" His eyes swiveled from where I stood, my arms stretched upwards, to the cereal just out of my reach. Unlike when Brandon trailed his eyes over me, there was nothing within Zeke's gaze. Zeke was an infuriating older brother that I had never asked for, eerily similar to Sean. "I would, Lola, really, but I'm making sure this bacon doesn't be. I'm sure you understand since I've been slaving away at this for over an hour now." His grin was sweet in the same devious way Maddox's was whenever he had something planned. His laughter drove away my voice, my rough shove to his stomach had him going even harder. I smirked at the few steps back he took, pleased that I had at least put some strength into the push. Using the silver handles of the cabinet for support, I pulled myself onto the countertop. The marble dug into my knees, but I was able to see the row of cereal boxes. Grabbing the first fruity, sugar-packed cereal I could get my hands on, I began to inch off the countertop. "What are you even doing here?" I asked Zeke. When a set of hands fell on my hips squeezing lightly, I had wanted to believe it was Maddox's touch because no one else in this house would dare. I knew that for a fact, which is why when I spun around and landed a sharp kick to Brandon's chest, I put extra effort into making it hurt. Surprise and delight exploded in his cyan eyes, making me wish I had kicked even harder. He stumbled backwards, the kitchen island making him halt. His lips tilted up in a smirk, so similar to Maddox's that it stoked the anger in my chest. He held some of those heartbreaking features my mate had, the ones that most likely won over countless she-wolves. Maddox's touch, whether forceful or gentle, were welcomed, but the touch of his brother, I wanted none of it. As far as I was concerned, he could take his oily smirk and frat boy personality. "What is your problem?" I snarled, relieved that I at least had the decency to lower my voice. There was no need for Claire or Killian to hear and come storming down. Or worse, Maddox. As much as I was ready to see Brandon get kicked, I really wanted some of the breakfast Zeke had made. "I've known you for all of 24 hours. Are you incapable of acting normal?" "My problem? I'm just attracted to the feisty, unattainable ones." Brandon sighed, truly wounded and at war with the world. I gave him a look that portrayed how much I believed his eternal struggle, which wasn't much. His next words, however, made me feel something more than just rage. His lips twitched into a smirk. His eyes, light where Maddox's were dark, flicked down to my neck. "As for acting normal, you're one to talk." His voice became whisper soft, and the teasing in it was anything but friendly. "It's easy to pretend you're normal when my brother's hand isn't around your throat." With those final words, Brandon grabbed a chocolate chip pancake and strolled out of the kitchen. "Maddox is going to tear into him when he finds out Brandon has a thing for you." Zeke snorted but gave me a reassuring grin. "They've been at each other's throats since they were kids. Feel free to kick Brandon, whenever you see fit, but just know he's only doing it to annoy Maddox off. Doesn't make it right, but everything Brandon does is at his own risk. As for why I'm here, he continued, holding up an empty carton of 24 eggs. Shaggy hair fell onto his forehead. I didn't have any eggs, and I wanted breakfast. Maddox woke up half an hour later, his dark eyebrows inching closer together as Zeke recounted how I kicked Brandon across the kitchen. I had to give it to Zeke, he made me sound much more badass than I was. Don't bother storming the house, he left half an hour ago. Zeke shrugged, grabbing a stack of plates as he began placing some food onto his own. His voice was light-hearted and jovial as he bounced between sausage and biscuits, buttered toast, and roasted potatoes. He's still good at stirring up and running. Nice to see that when the world is changing, some things remain the same. What exactly are you doing here, Zeke? Maddox asked after a few long moments of silence. Zeke looked towards me, a plate in his outstretched hand. Shrugging as I took it from him, I gave my rugged mate a grin. His hair was still messy from sleep, the long strands on the top fell over his forehead. Piercing eyes burned into my own, the golden hues swirling curiously. He didn't have any eggs. We did. We had a grand total of 20 minutes to eat and enjoy our morning before getting to work. Maddox and Zeke received a mind link from Sean and Mason, who were helping with security detail for the announcement. Just a few minutes later, I felt a few tugs down the link between Giovanni and myself. It wasn't surprising that we were both being called on, especially today. Brianna and Mason, along with the enthusiastic help of Alpha Zeke, have somehow managed to keep the rumors and whispered secrets under wraps this past month. All that hard work, it was about to unravel during this announcement. Even with all the excitement, Maddox and I had a few tasks of our own to take on. What about her? I sighed, holding up another manila folder with the same infuriatingly small print. This had been the 6th and final file I had handed to Maddox. With each passing second of scheming through the young woman's file, his scowl grew deeper. Maddox, we have to choose one. There aren't any more candidates. These background checks are all we have. I know we were both expecting more, but I think we should work with what we've got. You're comfortable bringing a stranger into this pack, one with magic? He questioned, golden eyes silent and still. He glanced down at the folder again, at the woman's moss-colored eyes and soft smile. By all accounts, she looked like an upstanding citizen. A preschool teacher for 5 years, but before that, there wasn't a whole lot to go on. She had moved around a bit, never staying anywhere for over 2 years. It was that way for all the women the witches we had looked over. Brianna's parents, both of which are historians, were currently scouring the country for magical texts, anything that could help Holly and I begin learning. When Maddox had put out the request for an actual witch someone to come train Holly and I wasn't sure if we'd receive any kind of feedback. The 15 candidates we had, they were more than I could have ever hoped for. I had scoured their files, reading everything back to Maddox. There were 2 I felt connected with. The first was the preschool teacher, her auburn curls and mossy eyes soft. She specialized in defense magic, but it was her background knowledge in blood magic that caught my attention. Blood magic itself sounded bad, but it was a part of Holly's heritage that she couldn't escape. Her mother, different from my own, was a blood witch. The second witch was a middle-aged woman with laugh lines around her eyes and mouth. Her pale blue eyes twinkled, like she held a secret the rest of the world wanted in on. Her specialty was ancient runes and protective sigils. Not only did we need the added protection, but there was something about her that felt comforting. Perhaps, it was because she reminded me of Grandma. Risk isn't anything new to us. Our lives have been full of it, especially lately. These women can help Holly and teach us how to use our magic. They can also help with any magical texts Brianna's parents find. I think that's worth letting them onto our land. I told him truthfully, knowing that if there were anyone who would listen to my thoughts, it was my mate. Maddox was silent for a few moments, his creased eyebrows softening as he relented. We'll have the witches contacted and brought here. Wages and housing can be debated when they arrive. You can let your vampire assistant know you've chosen. By vampire assistant, you mean Tristane. I smirked. Maddox had no problems with Giovanni and was even on first-name basis with the man. But yes, I'll let him know. Can you blame me for not liking him, Lola? The way his voice naturally lowered when he felt threatened, the honey in his eyes darkening to a rich caramel, it sent a skittering of excitement down my spine. This past month had been hectic, so much so that those intimate moments with Maddox and I were few and far between. I could feel the frustration and need building within him, feral and wild in comparison to the man that seemed so in control. I don't blame you at all. He can be insufferable. I agreed, my breath quickening when his eyes flicked down to my lips. No matter how badly I wanted to crumple under his rough touch, I stood my ground. But he's been more than helpful this month, especially with winning over the other vampires. I'll feel better once this announcement is finished and I can steal you away for the rest of the night. He grunted, his fingers tangled in the silky strands of my hair. I shivered under his touch and felt my legs clench at his words. I think I'll spend the night reminding you that no matter whose queen you are, you were my Luna first. Chapter 104. I had just cut the engine and stepped from the Escalade when Brianna stepped onto the wrap-around porch, her shoulder-length hair damp and curling at the ends. The long-sleeve t-shirt she wore had a bunch of wet patches from where she had hurried to dress. Her cheeks were still rosy from the shower. She grinned and waved but froze midway when Maddox's voice popped into both of our heads. I'm assuming the two of you are together, yes? Sure are. I responded seconds before Brianna's, yep. His frustration felt like coarse sandpaper as it vibrated down the bond. Before either of us had the chance to ask what had happened, his next words sent us both into stunned silence. Good, meet me at town hall, one of the witches we picked, she's here and she wants to speak with you. I could taste the ire in Maddox's every word and wondered if it was the school teacher / blood witch or the middle-aged protection witch who ordered my alpha of a maid to fetch me. I held no offense, but I knew Maddox's patience level as well as my own, and his was a bit lacking. That fast? Brianna frowned, her eyebrows gnashed together. But you haven't even is that why you've come? You found a witch for you and Holly. Maddox and I decided on two, but I guess the one came early. I shrugged, cringing at the confusion in my voice. I couldn't help but feel like I was already SG up this Luna / vampire queen thing. Really, really early. Maybe she's also psychic. Brianna suggested helpfully, giving me a soft smile when I refused to be convinced. I sighed when she swung an arm over my shoulders, steering the two of us towards the sedan. There's no way you could have seen this coming, Lola. Even our mighty Luna and Vamp Queen has her limits. On the bright side, think of how helpful she'll be. It took 10 minutes out of the half-hour drive to town hall for Brianna to have me smiling madly, laughing until tears filled the corners of my eyes. He actually fainted? I asked in between bursts of laughter. I tried to picture Mason, pale-faced and slack-jawed as he watched Giovanni tear open a blood bag. Well, he gagged first. Then he fainted. She laughed alongside me. Wiping the tears from her eyes, she ran her fingers through her now dry hair. He's tasted blood before, just like the rest of us. Kinda comes with the territory, you know? I think there's something about drinking it that makes him squeamish. It makes me squeamish too, sometimes. Don't tell him I told you, though. She warned. He made us all swear it would never leave the house, even Tristan removed the stick up to crack a grin. My lips are sealed. I smirked, tossing the imaginary key out the window. The forest never once thinned as we reached the center of town, even as buildings became larger and taller, glittering with clean windows and steel beams. Grocery stores and other chain restaurants began to pop up. Town Hall was a glittering building with tinted windows that showed only your reflection when you walked past. I had thought the parking lot was larger than necessary, until I watched another 30 cars pile in, all clamoring for a space. Park in the reserved spot. Brianna called out, pointing ahead. Directly in front of the doors was a reserved spot. The word itself was painted across the space in crimson letters. Do you think I'm allowed to? I caught myself only after I asked the insane question. You're Luna. Who else is this spot reserved for? Like I thought, she threw her head back and cackled gracefully. Mason emerged from Town Hall just as W.E. made it to the top of the stairs. Made from concrete, they led from the parking lot to the front of the building. A laugh bubbled in my throat as I remembered what had me near crying in the car. I schooled my face into neutrality and approached Mason with Brianna skipping at my side. Mason took one look at us, glancing from Brianna's redden to my own before snarling at the two of us. He ran a hand through his wind-blown hair, letting out a loud breath as he looked to the sky. You filthy traitor! He directed his disappointed words at Brianna before frowning in my direction, a faint blush staining his cheeks. And I didn't faint, I was just lightheaded. As we stepped inside, catching a strong whiff of artificial air fresheners and disinfectant, I wondered how either one managed to stay awake in this place. Identical-looking desks dotted the room, fitted with 2 drawers on either side of a basic office chairs. The carpet was a blah shade of grey, and the walls white. Cubicles separated the desks, and the people who typed away. Some wore small headsets and took phone calls, others sat bored on their phones. Luna, we were told to be expecting you. A wispy voice called out, one I had almost ignored. I was still getting used to my title but turned and smiled politely at the woman. She was small in stature and had fine lines around her mouth and eyes. Her wheat blonde hair was graying around the roots, and her voice was full of warmth. If you'll follow me, I'll escort you to Alpha and his guests. My eyes were drawn to where Maddox stood, towering over everyone else as his sheer presence dominated the room. The broadness of his shoulders, the way his eyes both dissected and analyzed, he all but radiated intimidation. He had never frightened me, not in the same way he did the rest of the pack. The curly-haired witch that sat in a creme pencil skirt, her legs crossed at the ankles, showed no fear towards Maddox either. Her nude-colored nails tapped idly on the table, in tune with the sound of the ticking clock. The white blouse she wore buttoned up to her neck, making it look as though she might have come from an important event. Maddox's Beta and Alpha Zeke hovered nearby, the latter much more relaxed despite the situation. This is my mate and Luna, Lola. Lola, how wonderful to meet you. My name's Rowena Clark, but any variation of Rowena works. Her heart-shaped face was soft and kind, round around her cheeks. She clasped her hands together, excitement blossoming in her eyes, turning them from moss to emerald. I know I'm early, more than early. I was simply too excited. I had an inkling you were going to choose me, so I caught the first flight here. Are your inklings usually correct? Zeke asked, interest appearing in his eyes. Maddox flashed his friend a look, knowing as well as I that when Zeke became fixated on something, he was hard to sway. Have any inklings on where I can find my mate? Rowena laughed, the sound was light and airy. Her teeth were straight and white, nothing like the image I had concocted in my head. Obviously, witches weren't these ugly beings with warts and blisters, but I hadn't expected her to seem so normal as well. Here's your first lesson, Lola. And you, Alpha Zeke. Be careful making a deal with a witch. Magic can get you into all sorts of tricky situations, and rarely does it help you out of them. She said, softly spoken yet confident. I could see the previous preschool teacher within her steady voice and tone. Her eyes fell on my face but fell to the center of my chest. You and your sister's magic will continue to manifest. It will grow stronger and more unpredictable unless you train and give it an outlet. I believe there's much I can teach the two of you. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to work with you and your sister, Luna Lola. Your background in blood magic, how extensive is it? I asked, feeling my stomach curl as my mouth formed the words. Drinking blood was something I was increasingly fond of, but the word blood magic continued to give me the chills. To actually preform blood magic is purely based on your genetics. I am only 1/8 blood witch, therefore I can do little. However, I am extremely knowledgeable on the subject. Before my mother passed 7 years ago, she passed down our family tomes. A few of them were on blood magic. Will you have an issue housing with another witch? I've invited another for the position, but she specializes in protection magic and runes. I think that with the two of you, my sister and I can learn to control our magic and protect our peoples. I explained, you would live in the same house, nothing more. Another witch? She seemed surprised that we might have considered another, or that she hadn't seen the outcome. I wasn't sure. She pursed her nude-painted lips half a second before nodding softly. That sparkle of genuine excitement in her eyes brought a hopeful grin to my face. I do enjoy my privacy, but I can share a household with another witch. Now, when might I begin training you and your sister? The announcement is tonight, and we're going to that party tomorrow afternoon, Alpha Zeke hummed, ticking them off on his fingers. Monday you can start Monday. Maddox's voice was resolute, slicing through Zeke's like a double-edged blade. He turned to his beta, Blake, and nodded. Escort her to the Wesley house and provide her with one of the cars for the duration of her stay. I'll come by Monday, and we can work out a schedule for you and your sister, yes. Rowena smiled softly, extending a hand towards my own. I was surprised by the firmness in her grip but smiled in return and nodded. Sounds good to me. I'll let Holly know when we're meeting up. Rowena followed Blake from the room, tugging alone an eggshell-colored suitcase. Once the glass doors clanged shut, and the figures of Blake and Rowena faded down the hall, Maddox turned his intense gaze to where Zeke sat. Zeke lounged lazily, his muscular biceps flexing as he stretched his arms out behind his head. It wasn't that Zeke didn't fear Maddox, he just had no sense of self-preservation. He ran headfirst into the fire, almost excited to get burned. Maddox's voice was low and collected, dangerously calm. Since when are we going to this party? You didn't think your brother would keep it quiet that the Alpha and Luna of our pack were coming to a college frat party? Half of the university is tweeting about it right now. The party is officially invite only, and you're my invite. Besides, I'm not being left out again. Zeke pouted, shaking his head. Is this a phobia of yours? Brianna snorted, combusting into full-blown laughter when Zeke shook his head disparagingly and groaned, actually, it's because of my abandonment issues. Chapter 105. The moment the sun began to settle in the sky, the countdown began in the back of my mind. It inched closer with each ticking second, until I found myself standing before thousands of werewolves. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked out at the sea of people, thousands of features illuminated from the last shreds of fading sun. Even with the little jitters of panic that raced down my spine, I reminded myself that I wasn't alone. The words of my family and friends circled my mind, chasing away the doubt that lingered at the corners. The hairs along my arms lifted as I dared to look past the sprawling crowd, towards the forest that seemed near pitch black. I could see the tendrils of darkness slithering far from the light's reach, merely observing, watching and waiting for blood. To my right stood Maddox, tall and proud in a long-sleeve shirt, darker than the encroaching night sky. He stood tall and confident, like a king who had never doubted his title, his place in his own kingdom. Only I could see the tenseness of his jaw, and the vein that protruded from his neck. The golden flecks in his eyes swirled, making them brighten and flash dangerously. Towards the left of the stage stood Zeke, his arms crossed in front of him, a crucial ally for our pack and a trusted friend. Maddox's beta stood to the right, a quiet man who saw much more than the rest of us. He peered out into the crowd, his face neutral beneath the harsh stage lights. Claire and Killian, the previous Alpha and Luna, stood behind us. Brandon, clueless and already bored, had his place on stage. He had brought it on himself, flashing me a flirty grin as we walked onto the stage. The way his brother's eyes darkened, I knew Brandon had it coming. I was sure I had scented bourbon on him half an hour before the announcement, but there was no fog of drunkenness in his eyes. I gave no more thought to Maddox's troublesome brother. Their strange relationship/feud was the least of my problems, and I knew I wouldn't be the one to end a lifetime of rivalry. However, I had no problems breaking his hands, should he decide to touch me again. While I suggested inviting Rowena to the pack meeting, Maddox refused. I understood his mistrust, especially with how little we knew about witches. The last thing he wanted was his people exposed and at risk. I want to thank you all for leaving your children and families to come here tonight. I trust that those of you in need of babysitters took advantage of the services the local community centers are providing. Maddox addressed the crowd, his gruff voice emerged from the speakers on either side of the stage. The crowd began just a few feet away. There was nothing separating us from them, no barrier or line of guards. We weren't above them, no matter our position. There were countless warriors amongst the crowd, different ages and genders as they blended in effortlessly. It's rare that I hold announcements such as these, but as you can tell from the presence of our Luna, things have been changing. Our view on the world must change as well. My mate has my full trust, and all I ask is that you give her the same respect as you have my own family. I listened to him almost enviously, hearing the silent command in his words. He addressed his pack as equals, but there was absolutely no mistaking the authority in his voice and the dominating stance he held on the stage. I squared my shoulders and stepped towards the microphone, because if there was one thing I was sure of, it was that I never ran from a fight, even if it wasn't the kind of fight I was used to. Maddox took over my pack over a year ago, and while I haven't been one of you for long, my hometown has flourished under his hand. I know the rumors and the questions you all have. The battle in my hometown wasn't a small one. There are some of you here who feel that loss, and I wish for the life of me that I could change that. I'm sure many of you have come to your own conclusions, but tonight we're setting everything straight. I wasn't the seasoned and poised public speaker Maddox was, but my firm tone and unwavering voice caught the attention of the crowd. I could feel each and every one of their eyes on me, trying to peer past bone and flesh to see the answers hidden within my head. Maddox's hand found my own, squeezing softly. The battle in my hometown was the tipping point in a feud between our kind and another race of beings, ones not talked about nearly enough. Werewolves have all but forgotten about the existence of vampires, and that was our first mistake. We have been misinformed about these people, left to HR stories that bred prejudice and fear. I took a soft breath, tasting the anticipation of the crowd. It was tart like pomegranates, with something bitter hidden beneath. What our ancestors have failed to teach us, is that vampires are more similar to ourselves than we care to admit. The crowd's murmuring began to grow, concern and panic rising, but I refused to stand down. A surge of frustration pulsed through me. This had to work, they had to listen to me, to their Luna. They are no more monsters than we are. Capable of good and evil, just like our human neighbors. My voice was a whip, slicing through the insolence of the crowd. It was unbreakable, unbendable, as I informed the people sworn to abide by the laws of their Alpha and Luna, bound by honor and blood. Any judgments you have about them, look towards yourselves first. Should my mate and your Alpha have been cruel and unforgiving, this pack would be no different than the kingdom of the vampires, the kingdom that my biological father built after getting my mother pregnant, the very kingdom I have been tasked with transforming. A symphony of gasps and exclamations, the burning eyes of the crowd brighter than the stage lights. I could taste the adrenaline and surprise but refused to stop. I scanned the crowd with my senses, venturing even farther to where the forest surrounded us. I could just make out the low croak of a couple toads, and the rustling of deer migrating away from the noise and light. There were far too many scents to comb through, but a tickling in my gut told me to remain on alert. Counting the seconds and bracing myself for much more than the reaction of the crowd, I continued. The Vampire King's DH has given these people a second chance, one where they won't be forced into a war they never wanted. Families with women and children, held at the throat by a cruel king. These are the vampires, the people that I am advocating for. They are the ones who wish to rebuild what was destroyed, and to taste peace they've never known. My fingers twitched in Maddox's hand as the distant sound of wildlife was snuffed out. Not a single cricket chirped nor branch rustled, even the breeze itself had halted. The trees in the back ceased their swaying, and the world itself seemed to still. "Are you ready?" Maddox asked, feeling the change in the air and in how I stood. I gave him the barest of nods, keeping my head turned towards the crowd. There are vampires who are against the idea of peace, who want to cause chaos and DH. It is our duty to both werewolves and vampires that these threats are extinguished, so that peace. My voice didn't falter, even when the glint of a silver pistol snagged my eyes. Deep within the churning crowd, swallowed by darkness and a sea of featureless faces, my heightened senses made out the object. My gut tightened, as it often did when something was awry. As a single gunshot rang out, the sound deafening over the murmur of the crowd, I shifted ever so slightly. My last thought before bracing for impact was, "This is going to hurt." Chapter 106. I had never quite become used to pain, even after enduring so much. Every time it ripped the breath from my lungs, unique in how it seared and tore at my insides. As I clutched my shoulder, feeling the heat of my own blood as it wept in between my fingers, its sweet scent spilled into the air. I ground my teeth together and steeled my spine, even though the dark spots dancing behind my eyes grew in size. I could hear Maddox's muffled yet powerful voice, silencing the deafening thunder that came from hundreds of snarls. He eased the panic from the crowd, and the tension from the warriors among them. My shoulder was throbbing and burning from the silver bullet lodged within it. Once I managed to straighten without vomiting, I peeled back the layers of my shirt and swallowed as I looked at the gaping hole in my shoulder. I'll admit, it wasn't the most pleasant of plans, but we knew this moment would draw them out. The crusade of vampires still loyal to my father were gathering, more than eager to remove me from the throne. It was why we banned children from attending and threw in hundreds of warriors from both Zeke's pack and our own. Obviously getting shot wasn't on my to-do list for the day, but I wanted the vampires close. As close as they could get without dispersing throughout the town. Our warriors had scented them hours ago, but acting would have only made them abandon their plan and scatter. The guards hidden in the crowd surged towards the shooter. It was easy to tell the vampires amongst the crowd, the ones who had moved in during the chaos of my confession. They were the same people turning on their heel, shoving past the crowd and towards the surrounding forest. The warriors hidden amongst the crowd snared them, outnumbering them 10 to 1. I knew my part in all of this, especially if I were to be hurt. My jaw clicked as I ground my teeth together, and through the haze of pain in my eyes, I dug my fingers into my gunshot wound. I could feel Maddox's presence behind me, even though the silver burning into my flesh blocked our bond. He had no access to my thoughts or emotions, but he never needed them to tell what was going on in my head. The hand he placed on my hip, it was what kept me from failing, from proving that I was a weakness to this pack. The world around me threatened to sway, but the moment my fingers grasped the pesky thing, the release of pain felt like a burst of adrenaline. Smaller than a marble, the silver bullet burned the skin of my hand, but that pain was a mosquito bite compared to the wasp sting on my shoulder. I let the bit of metal clatter to the floor, a sound I was sure I had imagined. Feeling the weight of the crowd's eyes on my shoulders, processing that I had been shot wounded by silver and still standing. As I said, there are those who want to destroy all chances of peace, who want to stir up trouble and bring DH. I am the vampire queen, and I will stand by those who want peace. But make no mistakes, I am also your Luna, and I will protect my people at all costs. We brought the meeting to an end, and while hundreds of people began to file towards town, our warriors scoured the surrounding area. The vampires captured were brought to a bunker of underground cells, far from the urban areas of our pack. Everyone's nerves were fried, both with shock and relief that there had been absolutely no casualties. It took nearly 2 hours for everyone to file out, and the same length of time for the warriors to finish their search. I had been scooped into Maddox's arms and plied with blood bag after blood bag. Even though the first healed my wound completely, Maddox insisted I drink another. I couldn't resist him, not when his eyes turned to pools of black and his jaw was set in rage. Maddox had fought against this plan from the very beginning, even though he saw the potential within its layers and risks. The second blood bag had my head swimming deliciously, and my body thrumming with the energy that had been sapped by the silver. A thread of hope wound itself around my heart, because tonight had been a victory. Dad and Grandma had watched the announcement from the safety of the community center, where many of the children were being watched and cared for. Giovanni and Tristan were quickly convinced of my healthy state once they saw the blood rush to my cheeks after the first blood bag. It was Maddox who hovered over me, exuding protective alpha vibes. As I felt his muscular chest beneath my fingertips, I decided I could use a protective alpha. Since there's little chance of anyone getting sleep tonight and I want you to myself, I think I'll spoil things a bit early. Maddox's sudden words confused me, even more so when he led me to the escalade and refused to answer any of my questions. Understanding blossomed in my eyes as we turned off of a dark back road and onto a paved driveway. It twisted and turned around a patch of trees before curving in a circle. Light posts jutted from the ground, their circular tops illuminated the expanse of flower beds that lined the front of the stunning house. I hopped from the vehicle, my eyes on the porch that wrapped around the front. Off to the side of the house, I could see a sunroom that spanned the bottom and top floor, like the spiral tower of a castle. Large windows let in copious amounts of moonlight, emitting a dull glow from within. This is the house you built for us," I sputtered, feeling at a complete loss for words. We were mates, two halves of a whole, but the man had just built an entire house for someone he's officially been with only 2 months. A regular she-wolf expects flowers, maybe a pup or two, not the house of her dreams and an entire pack to care for. "Is there something you dislike about it?" His eyebrows began to knit together, and I scrambled for a response that wasn't hastily thrown together. "I can have anything you want changed. No, nothing needs to be changed. It's absolutely perfect." I smiled softly, giggling as I descended the porch stairs, towards the massive set of double doors that led inside. They were smooth and cold to the touch, made from a thick sort of metal. I turned towards Maddox. What happened to living simply, taking no more than what we needed? That changed when my mate became the queen of all vampires, and when a group of idiots thought it'd be a good idea to try and assassinate her. He snarled softly, his firm grip on my hips was more for his sake than my own. Maddox unlocked the front doors and gestured for me to enter. The gentle scent of fresh flowers mixed with an undertone of fading cleaner filled the house. Maddox's footfalls echoed as he walked over to the wall and flicked on the lights. We stood in a small foyer that overlooked a large living room with a stone-carved fireplace and a plush sectional dotted with fur blankets and throw pillows. A tantalizing image of Maddox and I, sprawled out before the fireplace, flashed in my head. I roamed the lower half of the house myself, murmuring and gasping as I ventured into room after room. Maddox trailed behind me, speaking when needed while letting me explore the place. The hallways weren't too wide, nor did they take up much space in the house. At the very end of the hall, beside a sliding glass door, was a room full of television screens. Maddox pulled each one up, showing me the front yard and the driveway we had just walked down. Somehow, I wasn't surprised to see that cameras dotted the property. I thought it was going to take another week, at the least. I asked teasingly, my heart fluttering when Maddox's full lips curved into a smirk. I moved things along. It was larger than his family's home, the ceilings higher and light fixtures nicer, but it wasn't as open and empty as Tyler's home had once been. Our voices didn't echo as they had in his, nor was the house itself steeped in loneliness and melancholy. This house, it was everything I had dreamed of. An amalgamation of my childhood home and the fortress of my childlike dreams. Maddox had listened to everything, every single detail. From the color and arch of the banisters to the way the staircase curled around itself. I let out a soft sigh when halfway through the tour, Maddox's eyes glazed over. My blood-induced rush of strength was wearing off, along with the adrenaline of almost being MD. Long story short, I was ready for a long night of blissful, uninterrupted sleep. Blake needs me, they picked up a stray scent. Could just be a harmless rogue, but we'll make sure they back off. He grumbled, running a hand through his hair. Stay here, wind down from that mess of a pack meeting. I have a group of warriors minutes away from here. They're coming as security detail. Show them to the camera room while I'm gone. I'll be back shortly, Lola. When I return, I'll personally run you a bath and wait on you hand and foot. If only you didn't know the way to my heart. I grumbled, but that shred of resistance disintegrated the moment his rough hands wrapped around the tops of my arms, pulling me flush against him as his lips grazed my forehead. They captured my own, sucking the breath from my lungs and the light from my soul. Maddox devoured my willpower and restraint, leaving me dazed and gasping as he slipped from the house. My stomach rumbled for something other than blood, and I turned towards the kitchen which Maddox had mentioned was fully stocked. In the back of my mind, I knew I had left the front door unlocked, but what was a front door against someone who wanted to do me harm? Besides, Maddox said the security men were only a few minutes away. I told myself this while I popped a tray of pizza rolls in the oven and ate them one by one, scalding my mouth irreparably in the process. After I had finished each and every one, perched on the edge of the smooth marble counter, did I realize 20 minutes had already passed. As I ventured back out into the living room, my eyes scanning the billowing seas that were drawn tightly shut, the softest of breezes glided through the room. The wisp of cold air had me spinning in place, my eyes locked on the front door, which sat wide open. I could see the forest which sat nearly 100 feet away, the trees' various towers of looming darkness, hosting a world of creatures within their depths. While it might have not been the brightest idea, I approached the open door and forced it shut. It was when my back was turned and my eye peering through the peephole that I heard a single voice. It was gruff like a male, but there was something off about it, like there was another voice hidden just beneath. "Lola, your mate sent me to protect you." What made me first pause was the use of my name. At Maddox's insistence, only my friends and family called me Lola. The rest of the pack and world knew me as Luna Lola. I wasn't yet used to the title, but I knew by now what to expect. If it weren't for the gut feeling in my stomach, the one that came with a rush of something foreign in my blood, I would have made a monumental mistake. That gut feeling chanted in my mind, "Don't do it, Lola, don't turn around." Chapter 107. What are you doing, Lola? Did you not hear me? Your mate has sent me. I'm here to protect you. The gruff male voice sounded deeper, distorted in a way that made my breath catch. What is this? This isn't a vampire. Maya snarled, her hackles raising. Her scent is wrong. Maddox isn't answering us, something must have happened. I think you should call on the shadows, Lola. This was bad, it had to be if Maya was condoning channeling the power of the shadows. The moment I reached out, feeling that bitter frost curl across my fingers like the greeting of an old friend, that voice sounded behind me. It was different, this time. No longer the deep rasp of a man, but the watery rasp of a woman. She hacked and coughed, but there was an accuracy to her voice that sounded deadly. Turn around. I reacted without thinking, my eyes darting to either side of me whilst my instincts screamed not to move. Panic and fear were telling me to tear open the front door and run into the night, where the shadows would surely protect me. A sounded feet behind me, and instead of darting out the front door like panic instructed, I veered to the right. I knew I had made the right decision when I felt 5 long fingers grasp at back of my head, missing by inches. If I had taken the time to unlock the door and yank it open, I would have been on the ground. Do not turn around, Luna. I've got her. It was Rowena's voice I heard, but it was also her warning that kept me from acting any further. My heart hammered in time with the seconds that passed, until a garbled screech filled the air. The scent of fresh blood permeated the room, but the smell held an underlying tone of rot. I counted to 163 before Rowena let out a soft breath and spoke. You can turn around now, Luna. Rowena panted softly, hovering over the from sprawled out onto the floor. Crimson blood, thick and dark, pooled onto the floor. I cringed as it soaked into the pale carpet. There was nothing mouth-watering about this blood, which smelled of dust and all things old. Her bony and gnarled limbs were tangled beneath the black cloak she wore. A thin neck, covered in dark-colored veins, protruded from one of the couch's throw pillows. It had been placed over her face by Rowena. Long hair, jagged and dry like straw, emerged from beneath the pillow. I was sure it had once been a glossy shade of amber, but the color was ruined by the thick chunks of grey. Rowena hovered over her, auburn eyebrows gnashed together as she ran her hands over the woman's body, murmuring to herself. What just happened? What is that? I removed my hand from the arm of the couch, which I had been gripping for dear life. Just as I stumbled towards the body, falling to my knees a few feet away, Rowena's head snapped up. Her mossy eyes were wide and a bit frazzled, and clutched in her hands was a curved dagger. The metal wasn't silver or steel, but some kind of dark gemstone. That is a witch, an experienced one. Rowena exhaled, catching her breath while letting the knife clatter to the ground. Her eyes were severe when they glanced up to my face, and as for what happened, she was trying to curse you. What do you mean she was trying to curse her? Maddox snarled, his golden-toned eyes falling on Rowena. He had been pacing the living room for near an hour now, rubbing the stubble along his jaw with a frustrated hand. Giovanni and Brianna had come, keeping watch as Maddox, Zeke, and Mason scoured the forest. Rowena was positive there were no other witches in the house, but we needed to be sure. This isn't her first rodeo. Rowena frowned, lifting one of the arms of the woman. Her skin was tinged yellow, with veins much darker than normal. On the palm of her hand a puckered scar sat at an odd angle. It took up most of her hand and was shaped like a crescent moon with a vertical slash down the center. She's cursed someone before, and from the looks of it, it was a nasty one. How convenient it is, that she showed up here the day of your arrival. This is the first and only witch I have ever encountered on my land. He commented, his voice harsh and accusing. I couldn't blame him, not when our entire pack could have been harmed. It was risk enough allowing witches into the pack, and already we were getting off on a bad foot. Would you care to tell me why you were in our house in the first place? Already you have overstayed your welcome. If a witch was on your land, you'd never know. Not unless they wanted you to. Rowena scoffed dryly, leveling Maddox with a look. She stood and dusted off her hands, never once breaking eye contact. There was something about the way she stood up to Maddox that I liked, even if I held no trust for the woman. As for why I was here, I had a bad feeling and followed it. It was the same kind of feeling that let me know I had been chosen for the job 2 days early. As you can now see, Alpha Maddox, magic has its benefits. If it weren't for my own, your mate would be worse than DD. I could hear no defensiveness in her voice, only truth as she explained that all witches have varying levels of intuition. It explained the gut feelings I had been having lately, the same one that consequently saved my life. Her face, why did you cover it? It was Brianna who had mustered up the courage to ask. I had wondered the same thing but was still stunned and trying to process. It was an odd feeling, to have 2 near-death experiences in one day. With the ambush during our announcement, I had felt more in control. Maddox and I had planned everything, down to where I would stand on stage. There had been no hint, no whisper of AK from the witches. Curses, they're tricky. In order to create one, you have to tap into dark powers. They can easily corrupt, and that corruption rots you from the inside out. Her expertise was why she was sent here, Rowena murmured, her eyes glancing down to the mark on the woman's hand. There's someone out there whose curse has been lifted, I wonder who the lucky soul is. It would have been smart to stay up for the night to figure out why this happened in the first place, but I was exhausted from spilling the truth to thousands of people and nearly DG twice. Maddox lifted me into his arms and placed me in the escalade. Rowena suggested it might be smarter to stay with Maddox's family a few days longer, until the witch specializing in protective magic made it to the pack. Until then, we were left with nothing to do but draw conclusions and chase sleep. When I opened my eyes and yawned that morning, I was surprised to find Maddox already awake. He had slipped in the room just as I sat up in bed. I noticed instantly the darkened circles beneath his eyes, and the way they muted the golden tones into a deep brown. "You've been busy early," I pointed out, sliding from the bed as I lifted my arms over my head and stretched. "I couldn't sleep, but without knowing why there was a second attempt on your life yesterday," he grunted, running a hand through already messy hair. His grip on my hips was nothing short of possessive, providing that flicker of pain I've become fond of. "I have spoken with Giovanni and the witch. The only conclusion we are able to come up with is that the vampires rallying against you have somehow gained the favor of a witch. My father was in contact with a blood witch. He mentioned it once, but I was never able to get anything more out of him. It could be that this witch is sending others, possibly to avenge his DH." I yawned, feeling just a tad better when Maddox huffed and nodded. I padded over to the closet, digging for a pair of shorts and a comfortable t-shirt. After switching on the shower in the bathroom, I poked my head from around the door. "What's on the itinerary for today?" "Hopefully no more assassination attempts, at least for the next few days. I think I need more time before we poke fun at your already numerous MR attempts." Maddox smiled dryly. The flicker of normalcy brought a teasing grin to my face. I knew that if we weren't in a house full of people, his parents included, I'd be draped over his lap by now, my reddened bottom poking towards the ceiling. "As for today, we're going to deal with the repercussions of last night, and try to get through this catastrophe of a party you've roped us into. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.